My sister stood up at family dinner and said, "I'm pregnant. With her husband's baby." I froze. My parents stared in shock. I smiled and said, "I'm so happy for you both." 9 months later, the DNA test revealed something that broke our entire family apart. The chocolate cake was still warm on my fork when my sister pushed back her chair. The scraping sound against the hardwood floor made everyone look up from their dessert plates. She stood there for a moment, her cardigan slightly wrinkled, hands trembling just enough that I noticed. The dining room fell quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioning above us. "I have something to tell everyone," she said, her voice carrying that familiar tone she used when she was about to drop important news. I remember thinking she might announce a new job or perhaps that she was finally moving out of our parents' house. At 26, she'd been talking about getting her own apartment for months. My mother set down her spoon and smiled encouragingly. "What is it, honey?" My father leaned forward slightly, his reading glasses reflecting the warm light from the chandelier. Even my mother-in-law, who usually kept to herself during these family gatherings, turned her attention toward my sister with genuine interest. "I'm pregnant," she announced, and the room erupted in congratulations before anyone processed what came next. My mother clapped her hands together. My father's face brightened. But then my sister raised her hand and something in her expression made everyone freeze. "The baby belongs to her husband." Before we continue with this shocking family revelation, I want to thank you for being here. If you believe that truth matters more than keeping peace, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more women facing betrayal. Now let's see how this unfolds. The words hung in the air like smoke. I felt my grip loosen on the small dessert fork in my hands. The chocolate suddenly felt too rich, too sweet. My fork clattered against the plate, but the sound seemed to come from somewhere far away. My mother's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. She looked from my sister to me, then to my husband, as if trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. My father's expression hardened, his jaw setting in that way it did when he was trying to control his temper. My husband finally looked up from his plate, but his eyes found my sister's face instead of mine. There was something there, something I couldn't quite name but recognized all the same. Not surprise. Not denial. Just a quiet acceptance that made my chest tighten. "David," my mother whispered, using my husband's name like a question. "Is this true?" He nodded once, barely perceptible, his gaze dropping back to the table. His fingers drummed against the wood surface, a habit he'd developed whenever he felt cornered at work meetings. I'd watched him do it 100 times, but never about something that involved me. My mother-in-law's reaction surprised me most. While everyone else sat frozen in shock, she leaned back in her chair with something that almost looked like relief. "Finally," she said, her voice soft but clear. I was beginning to think I'd never become a grandmother. The casual way she said it, as if my sister's pregnancy was a gift she'd been waiting for, made something cold settle in my stomach. Not once did she look at me. Not once did she acknowledge that this child would be born from betrayal, from the destruction of her son's marriage. My sister glanced at me then, and I saw something in her eyes that I'd never seen before. Not guilt. Not apology. Something that looked almost like victory. She'd always been the prettier one, the one who drew attention effortlessly. But this felt different. This felt deliberate. "How long?" my father asked, his voice carefully controlled. 3 months, she replied, her hand moving instinctively to her still flat stomach. "We didn't plan it, but we're happy." The words stung more than everything else combined. She'd already created a unit, a family that didn't include me. My husband and my sister had become we, while I sat at the same table, invisible. My mother finally found her voice. "Jessica, how could you?" she started, but my sister cut her off. "Mom, love doesn't follow rules. Sometimes these things just happen." Love. He called it love. As if that word could somehow make adultery acceptable. As if it could erase the fact that she'd systematically destroyed her own sister's marriage and felt proud of it. I realized everyone was waiting for me to react. To scream, to cry, to throw something. The silence stretched longer, becoming uncomfortable for everyone except me. In that moment I felt strangely calm, as if I was watching this scene happen to someone else. Then I smiled. It wasn't a genuine smile, but it was perfect. Polite, composed, the kind of smile I'd perfected in social situations when I needed to hide what I was really thinking. I watched my sister's confident expression falter slightly, confusion flickering across her features. "Congratulations," I said, my voice steady. "I'm so happy for you both." My mother stared at me as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. My father's eyebrows drew together in concern. Even my husband looked up, probably expecting anger or tears. But I kept smiling, kept my hands folded neatly in my lap, kept my voice level. "When are you due?" My sister blinked, clearly thrown off by my reaction. "December," she said hesitantly. "A winter baby. How wonderful." I picked up my fork again and took another bite of cake as if we were discussing the weather. "Will you continue working at the clinic?" The conversation stumbled forward from there, awkward and stilted. My mother tried to fill the silence with practical questions about doctors and prenatal care. My father retreated behind his coffee cup. My mother-in-law began talking about baby names and nursery arrangements. Through it all, I maintained my composure. I asked appropriate questions, made supportive comments, and acted like the perfect sister-in-law. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. The woman who had walked into this dinner hoping to reconnect with her husband was gone. In her place sat someone else entirely. Someone who understood that tears and anger would only give them what they expected. Someone who knew that the best revenge isn't always immediate or obvious. Someone who had learned, in the span of a single dessert course, that sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all. As the evening wound down and everyone prepared to leave, I hugged my sister goodbye. She felt tense in my arms, still uncertain about my reaction. "Thank you," I whispered in her ear, just loud enough for her to hear. "For showing me exactly who you are." She pulled back, searching my face for meaning, but I was already turning away. The real conversation would come later. Much later. When I was ready and when it would matter most. That night, as I lay in bed listening to my husband's careful breathing beside me, I made a decision. I wouldn't be the screaming, heartbroken wife. I wouldn't be the victim in this story. I would be something much more dangerous. I would be patient. The chocolate cake had been delicious, but it would be the last sweet thing I'd taste for a very long time. From now on, everything would have the bitter edge of betrayal. And I would use that bitterness to fuel something they'd never see coming. My smile in the darkness wasn't polite anymore. It was planning. The first 3 days passed without a single phone call. I kept checking my cell phone, expecting someone to reach out, to ask how I was holding up after the dinner revelation. But the screen remained dark. My parents, who usually called daily just to chat, suddenly went silent. My closest friend Sarah, who normally texted me random thoughts throughout the day, seemed to have forgotten I existed. David started leaving for work an hour earlier than usual. He'd shower quietly, dress in the walk-in closet, and slip out while I pretended to sleep. When he came home, it was always after 9 o'clock with some excuse about client meetings or paperwork. He'd heat up leftovers, eat standing at the kitchen counter, and mumble something about being tired before disappearing into the guest bedroom. The third night, I heard him on the phone through the thin wall. His voice was soft, careful, the way he used to talk to me when we were dating. "How are you feeling today?" he asked someone. "Did you remember to take your vitamins?" The tenderness in his tone made my stomach turn. He'd never asked me about vitamins, not even when I had the flu last winter. Jessica called him every morning at 7:30 sharp. I knew because his phone buzzed on the nightstand and I could see her name lighting up the screen. He'd grab it quickly and step onto the balcony for privacy. Through the glass doors, I watched him pace back and forth, occasionally laughing at something she said. Once I saw him touch his chest where his heart was, the gesture so intimate it felt like watching something I shouldn't see. My mother-in-law arrived on Thursday with shopping bags from Target. She didn't knock, just used her spare key and called out cheerfully as she entered. "I found the most adorable little outfits," she announced, spreading tiny clothes across my coffee table. Yellow onesies with cartoon ducks. A miniature sweater with matching booties. A soft blanket with teddy bears embroidered along the edges. "Isn't this precious?" she cooed, holding up a newborn-sized sleeper. I couldn't resist. "The baby will need so many things." She spoke about the pregnancy as if it were a family celebration, not the destruction of her son's marriage. Her excitement felt genuine, undiluted by shame or guilt. In her mind, Jessica was giving her what I had failed to provide. A grandchild. A legacy. Purpose. "I've already started converting the spare room upstairs," she continued, folding the clothes with practiced precision. David mentioned you two weren't using it for anything important anyway. It'll make a perfect nursery once the baby arrives. The casual way she erased me from the equation stung more than I expected. My art supplies lived in that room. My easel, my canvases, the painting I'd been working on for months. But apparently my creative space wasn't important enough to preserve. I watched her arrange the baby clothes in neat piles, her movements efficient and purposeful. She'd already mentally redesigned my house, planned my future, and written me out of the story entirely. I was just an inconvenient detail, something to be worked around rather than considered. "Have you thought about moving back with your parents?" she asked suddenly, not looking up from her organizing. "It might be easier for everyone involved. Less awkward, you know." The suggestion hit me like cold water. She wanted me gone. Not just emotionally distant or accepting of the situation, but physically removed from the picture. In her perfect world, David and Jessica would raise their child in my house, surrounded by my furniture, sleeping in my bed. I excused myself and went upstairs, leaving her to her shopping display. In the bathroom, I splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection. The woman looking back seemed smaller somehow, faded around the edges. When had I become so easy to dismiss? That evening I decided to test something. I made David's favorite dinner, grilled salmon with lemon butter, roasted asparagus and garlic mashed potatoes. I set the table with our wedding china, lit candles, and even put on the dress he'd bought me for our first anniversary. He walked in at 9:15, saw the setup and froze. "What's all this for?" "I thought we could talk," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "About everything. About us." He shifted uncomfortably, checking his phone twice during my sentence. "Listen, Sarah, I'm really tired tonight." Rain check. Sarah. He called me Sarah. My friend's name. The same friend who hadn't contacted me since the dinner. The same friend who, I suddenly realized, had been unusually quiet about my marriage problems lately. "Did you just call me Sarah?" I asked. His face flushed. "No," I said. "I meant." He fumbled for words, then gave up. "I'm going to bed." After he left, I sat alone at the carefully set table, staring at the untouched food. The candles burned down to stubs while I processed what had just happened. It wasn't just Jessica. Sarah was involved too. My husband was juggling multiple relationships while I played house with his dirty laundry. I blew out the candles and began clearing the table. In the kitchen, while scraping uneaten salmon into the garbage disposal, I found a receipt tucked behind the coffee maker. Lunch for two at Romano's, our anniversary restaurant. The date was yesterday. The timestamp showed 1:30 p.m., when David had texted me about a work lunch with colleagues. But it was the handwritten note on the back that made my hands shake. "Can't wait to feel the baby kick. Love you both. D." Both. He loved them both. Jessica and the baby. A ready-made family that didn't include me. I climbed the stairs slowly, past the spare room where my mother-in-law had left baby clothes scattered across my art table. In my bedroom, I opened the laptop and searched for something I'd never thought I'd need to research. DNA testing services. The websites explained paternity tests, chain of custody procedures, legal implications. I bookmarked 3 different companies and compared their processing times. Then I opened my old address book, the leather-bound one my mother had given me as a wedding gift. I flipped through pages of contact information, past college friends and distant relatives, until I found what I was looking for. Aaron Mitchell. Jessica's ex-boyfriend from 2 years ago. The one she'd cried over for months after their breakup. The one my parents thought was too intense and not stable enough for their daughter. I stared at his phone number, written in my own careful handwriting from when Jessica had asked me to keep it, just in case. She'd made me promise never to delete it, claiming she might need it someday for closure. Well, closure was exactly what I planned to give her. I dialed Aaron's number the next morning while David was in the shower. My fingers trembled as I pressed each digit, muscle memory guiding me through numbers I'd looked at but never called. The phone rang 3 times before his familiar voice answered. "Hello. Aaron, it's Sarah. Jessica's sister." I kept my voice steady, professional. "I know this is unexpected, but I need to ask you something important." There was a long pause. In the background, I could hear traffic and what sounded like construction equipment. "Sarah? Oh, it's been, 2 years? Is everything okay? When did you last see Jessica?" Another pause, longer this time. "Why are you asking?" "Please, Aaron. It's complicated, but I really need to know." He sighed. We ran into each other about 4 months ago at that coffee shop on 5th Street. He seemed different. Happier, I guess. We talked for maybe 20 minutes. Why? 4 months ago. Right around the time Jessica claimed the affair with David had started. But if she was 3 months pregnant now, the timing didn't add up. I thanked Aaron and hung up, my mind racing with possibilities I didn't want to consider. I spent the rest of the week becoming a detective in my own life. While David was at work, I went through our shared calendar, cross-referencing his business trips with Jessica's social media posts. David had been in Chicago for a 3-day conference in early February. During those exact dates, Jessica had posted photos from a beach vacation in Florida with friends. Yet she told everyone at dinner that those February days were when their relationship had deepened. Her Instagram told a different story than her pregnancy announcement. I scrolled back through months of posts, screenshotting timestamps and locations. There were pictures of her at wine tastings in January, holding full glasses with captions about treating myself. Photos from a ski trip in December where she was clearly drinking beer with friends. If she was 3 months pregnant now, she would have been drinking alcohol throughout her first trimester. But it was the photo from Valentine's Day that stopped me cold. Jessica at a romantic restaurant, holding hands across the table with someone whose face was partially obscured by candlelight. The man had Aaron's distinctive silver watch, the one with the scratched bezel that he'd worn every day when they were dating. I zoomed in on the image until the pixels blurred, but I was certain. That weekend I suggested David and I visit Jessica to check on her and start being more supportive. He seemed surprised by my sudden interest but agreed. I packed a gift bag with herbal teas and a beautiful ceramic mug set I'd bought specifically for this purpose. Jessica's apartment was different. Tidier. She'd always been messy, leaving dishes in the sink and clothes draped over furniture. But now everything was organized, almost clinical. Pregnancy magazines were stacked neatly on the coffee table next to prenatal vitamin bottles that looked untouched. You look wonderful, I told her, studying her face carefully. She did look different, but not in the way pregnant women usually did. She seemed nervous, jumpy. Her eyes darted between David and me like she was calculating something. Thank you for the tea set, she said, unwrapping my gift. It's beautiful. I thought you might enjoy having something special for your morning routine, I replied, watching as she examined each piece. Would you like me to make you some tea now? You should stay hydrated. She agreed, and I busied myself in her kitchen, deliberately taking my time. When I returned with the steaming mug, we chatted about doctor appointments and baby preparations. Jessica held the cup carefully, sipping the chamomile tea I'd brewed strong enough to mask any lingering taste. Have you thought about telling Aaron? I asked casually, noting how her hand froze halfway to her lips. Why would I tell Aaron anything? She replied, but her voice had an edge to it. Oh, I just thought, you two were so close once. Doesn't he deserve to know you're happy? David looked confused by the direction of our conversation, but Jessica's face had gone pale. She set down the mug with shaking hands and excused herself to the bathroom. While she was gone, I quickly wrapped the used mug in a napkin and slipped it into my purse. Later that week, I visited David's dentist office during lunch, claiming I needed to pick up his insurance forms. The receptionist, who knew me from previous visits, chatted pleasantly while I waited. When she stepped away to make copies, I quietly took David's spare toothbrush from the drawer where he kept his travel dental supplies. The DNA testing kit arrived in unmarked packaging. I followed the instructions precisely, swabbing the inside of the mug Jessica had used and carefully preserving saliva from David's toothbrush. I labeled everything according to the lab's specifications and drove to the post office myself, not trusting the mailbox pickup. The waiting was torture. 2 weeks felt like 2 months. I went about my normal routine, but everything felt surreal, like I was acting in a play where I'd forgotten my lines. David continued his pattern of early departures and late returns. My mother-in-law brought more baby items. Jessica posted ultrasound photos on social media that I studied like puzzle pieces. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Plain white, no return address except for the lab's P.O. box. My hands shook so violently I could barely tear it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper with official letterhead and clinical language that reduced my entire world to percentages and probabilities. Based on genetic analysis, David Mitchell is excluded as the biological father of the tested sample. Probability of paternity, 0%. I read the line 3 times before the words sank in. David wasn't the father. The baby Jessica was carrying belonged to someone else. All of this, the family dinner announcement, the guilt, the destruction of my marriage, was built on a lie. But I didn't scream. I didn't call anyone. I didn't confront Jessica or David or demand explanations. Instead, I folded the paper carefully and placed it in my desk drawer. Then I made a grocery list and planned the most important dinner party of my life. The invitations were simple, elegant. Join us for a celebration dinner to welcome our family's newest addition. I hand-delivered them to my parents, mailed one to my mother-in-law, and personally drove to Aaron's current address to slip one under his door. At the bottom of each invitation I added a handwritten note. Your presence would mean the world to us during this special time. Aaron's invitation included one additional line. There's something important you need to know. The stage was set. The truth was ready to make its debut. And for the first time in weeks I felt genuinely excited about something. Saturday evening arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything feel sharper, more defined. I spent the entire day preparing, moving through my kitchen with a precision I'd never felt before. Every detail mattered tonight. The roast beef had to be perfect. The wine had to breathe at exactly the right temperature. The dining room had to look welcoming enough to lower everyone's guard. David noticed my unusual energy but misinterpreted it completely. It's nice to see you excited about having everyone over, he said, adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror. I think this dinner will be good for all of us. I smiled and handed him the cloth napkins to fold. Yes, I think tonight will change everything. My parents arrived first, my mother carrying a bouquet of yellow roses and my father holding a bottle of champagne. For the celebration, he said, though his smile seemed forced. I could tell they were still processing everything that had happened at the last family dinner, still trying to figure out how to navigate this new reality. My mother-in-law swept in 15 minutes later with a jewelry box tucked under her arm. I brought something special, she announced, opening it to reveal a delicate silver anklet with tiny bells. This was David's when he was a baby. I've been saving it for my first grandchild. The casual possessiveness in her voice made my jaw clench, but I maintained my composure. How thoughtful of you to bring family heirlooms, I said, taking the box from her hands. I'm sure the baby will treasure this someday. Jessica and David entered together, and I noticed immediately how comfortable they'd become with each other. She had her hand on his arm as they walked through the door, and he guided her to the most comfortable chair without being asked. They moved like a couple who'd been together for years, not two people caught in a scandalous affair. You look radiant, my mother told Jessica, and it was true. My sister practically glowed with satisfaction. She was wearing a flowing dress that emphasized her still small bump, and she kept one hand resting protectively over her stomach. Every gesture seemed calculated to remind everyone of her condition, of the precious life she was carrying. Dinner conversation flowed surprisingly smoothly. We talked about baby names and nursery themes. My father shared stories about when Jessica and I were children. My mother-in-law discussed her plans for spoiling her grandchild. Through it all, I played the perfect hostess, refilling wine glasses and steering conversations away from any awkward silences. I served the soup course with steady hands, though inside I felt like I was vibrating with nervous energy. Everyone complimented the butternut squash bisque, and I graciously accepted their praise while mentally counting down the minutes until dessert. The main course came and went. My mother helped me clear plates while the men discussed football scores. Jessica excused herself to the bathroom twice, each time returning with David's concerned attention. Are you feeling all right? He asked after her second trip. Maybe you should lie down. I'm fine, she assured him, but I caught the quick glance she shot toward the front door. She was nervous about something, though she was hiding it well. As I brought out the dessert plates, the doorbell rang. The entire table went quiet. David checked his watch, frowning. Are we expecting someone else? Actually, yes, I said, setting down the dessert tray and smoothing my dress. I invited one more guest. I thought it would be nice to have the whole family together. I opened the front door to find Aaron standing on my porch, dressed in a navy suit with a burgundy tie. He'd gotten his hair cut since I'd last seen him, and he looked nervous but determined. In his hand was a small gift bag with tissue paper peeking out the top. Aaron, I said warmly, loud enough for everyone in the dining room to hear. Thank you so much for coming. Please come in. The silence from the dining room was deafening. I led Aaron through the hallway, watching as every head turned toward us. My parents looked confused. My mother-in-law appeared annoyed by the interruption. David's eyebrows were drawn together in a deep frown. But Jessica's reaction was what I'd been waiting for. The color drained from her face so quickly I thought she might faint. She started to stand, then sat back down, then gripped the edge of the table like she needed it for support. Her mouth opened and closed without making any sound. Everyone, I announced cheerfully, I'd like you to meet Aaron Mitchell. He's an old friend of the family. Aaron, you remember my parents, of course. And this is my mother-in-law, Patricia. My husband, David. And Jessica. Aaron's eyes found Jessica immediately, and something passed between them that was too complex for me to fully understand. Recognition certainly, but also pain, longing, and something that might have been hope. Hello, Jessica, he said quietly. You look different. What are you doing here? She whispered, her voice barely audible. I invited him, I said, moving to the sideboard where I'd placed an envelope earlier that evening. I thought it was time we all got to know each other better. Especially since we're going to be family. David was staring at Aaron with growing suspicion. I'm sorry, but who exactly are you? I'm Jessica's ex-boyfriend, Aaron replied, his voice growing stronger. We dated for almost 2 years. Until she broke up with me 6 months ago. The math hung in the air like smoke. 6 months ago. Not 2 years. Jessica's carefully constructed timeline was beginning to unravel in real time. Actually, I said, reaching for the envelope, I think there's something everyone should know before we have dessert. Something that changes everything. My hands were remarkably steady as I opened the envelope and pulled out the lab results. Jessica made a small sound, almost like a whimper. David looked back and forth between Aaron and Jessica, pieces of a puzzle finally clicking into place in his mind. I had some tests done, I announced to the room. Just to be absolutely certain about the baby's paternity. You know, for medical history purposes. Family genetics are so important. I unfolded the paper and read aloud, my voice clear and strong. Based on genetic analysis, David Mitchell is excluded as the biological father. Probability of paternity, 0%. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the next room. My mother's fork clattered onto her plate. My father removed his glasses and cleaned them unnecessarily. My mother-in-law's mouth hung open in shock. Aaron stepped forward, his face a mixture of confusion and dawning realization. Jessica? Is there something you need to tell me? But Jessica just sat frozen, staring at the paper in my hands like it was a weapon pointed directly at her heart. The real question, I said, folding the results and placing them back in the envelope, is why my sister felt the need to destroy my marriage for a baby that was never my husband's to begin with. The explosion that followed my revelation shattered more than just the evening. Jessica finally found her voice, but it came out as desperate denials mixed with accusations. You planned this, she screamed at me, pointing a shaking finger across the table. You orchestrated this whole thing just to humiliate me. Aaron stood frozen near the doorway, still holding his gift bag, trying to process what he'd walked into. Jessica, is the baby mine? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She turned on him with fury I'd never seen before. Don't you dare come in here acting like you care. You left me, remember? You said I was too much drama for your precious career. You broke up with me, Aaron shot back, his confusion evident. You said you needed space. You said you'd found someone else. Because I was pregnant and you weren't ready to be a father. The words tore out of her throat like they'd been trapped there for months. The room erupted. My mother gasped and covered her mouth. My father stood up so quickly his chair toppled backward. David finally spoke, his voice cold and distant. So this whole thing was what? Some elaborate scheme to trap me into raising another man's child. Jessica's face crumpled, but there were no tears. Just raw desperation. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. I was scared. Aaron had already moved on, gotten that promotion in Seattle. You were married but miserable. I thought if I could just make it work. Make what work? David demanded. Destroying my marriage? Lying to our entire family? My mother-in-law rose from her chair like a queen dethroned. The silver anklet she'd brought sat abandoned on the table, its tiny bells silent. I have grandchildren to spoil, she announced icily, but they won't be coming from this family. She gathered her purse and coat with precise movements, each gesture radiating wounded pride. David, when you decide to start acting like the man I raised, you know where to find me. She left without looking back, and somehow her departure felt more final than any screaming match could have. My father was the next to speak, his voice heavy with disappointment. Jessica, how could you do this to your sister? To our family? Don't lecture me about family loyalty, Jessica snapped, her desperation morphing into defensive anger. Where was everyone when I needed support? When I was scared and alone? You were never alone, my mother said quietly, tears streaming down her face. We would have helped you. We would have supported you and the baby. We would have worked something out with Aaron. But this, lying, manipulating, destroying your sister's marriage. This isn't who we raised you to be. Aaron set his gift bag on the side table and walked closer to Jessica. I would have come back, he said simply. If you told me about the baby, I would have figured out a way to make it work. I loved you. Loved, Jessica repeated bitterly. Past tense. Yes, Aaron confirmed without hesitation. Past tense. Because the woman I loved wouldn't have done this. The fight went out of Jessica all at once. She slumped in her chair, one hand still resting on her stomach, looking smaller and more lost than I'd ever seen her. For a moment I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. David turned to me and I saw something I hadn't expected in his eyes. Not guilt or shame but relief. Thank you, he said quietly. For finding out the truth. For ending this before it went any further. Don't thank me, I replied, my voice steady. Thank yourself. You made your choices long before tonight. He nodded slowly, understanding passing between us. I'll pack some things and stay at a hotel. We should probably talk about the practical stuff. Lawyers and all that. There's nothing to discuss, I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. I'll file the papers this week. You can have your lawyer contact mine. Sarah, I know I messed up, but maybe we could try counseling. Even if the baby had been yours, I interrupted, I'd still be done. This isn't about Jessica or the pregnancy. It's about who you chose to be when you thought no one was watching. That silenced him completely. My parents gathered their things quietly, my mother pausing to kiss my forehead. We're proud of you, she whispered, for handling this with such grace. My father squeezed my shoulder. You'll stay strong. You always have. After they left, it was just Jessica, Aaron, David, and me in my dining room, surrounded by the remnants of what was supposed to be a celebration dinner. The silence stretched until Aaron finally spoke. I need to know about the baby's health, he said to Jessica. Medical history, prenatal care, everything. This changes things for me too. Jessica nodded mutely, finally understanding that her elaborate deception had gained her nothing and cost her everything. David disappeared upstairs and returned with a hastily packed suitcase. He paused at the front door, looking back at me one more time. I'm sorry, he said. For all of it. I know you are, I replied. But sorry doesn't fix anything. It just makes you feel better about walking away. After he left, Aaron helped Jessica to her car. I watched from the window as they stood talking in my driveway for nearly 20 minutes. Their body language told the whole story, his careful distance, her pleading gestures, his final shake of the head before walking to his own car. I spent the rest of the evening cleaning up alone, washing dishes and folding napkins and putting away the good china. The house felt different already, lighter somehow, despite everything that had happened. For the first time in months, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. The truth was out, the lies were exposed, and whatever came next would be built on solid ground. The quiet that settled over my house that night wasn't the suffocating silence of secrets. It was the peaceful quiet of truth finally spoken, of masks finally removed, of a woman finally free to breathe in her own home. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in my favorite chair, looking around at the space that was wholly mine again. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and paperwork and difficult conversations. But tonight, for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt like myself again. The first morning I woke up alone in my house felt like emerging from underwater. No rushing footsteps in the hallway, no shower running while I made coffee, no careful tiptoeing around someone else's mood. Just silence and possibility stretching ahead of me like an empty canvas. I made breakfast for one, scrambled eggs with fresh herbs from the garden I'd neglected for months. As I ate at the kitchen counter, still in my pajamas at 9 in the morning, I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd done something this simple without checking the time or worrying about someone else's schedule. The divorce papers were surprisingly straightforward. David's lawyer was efficient and businesslike, clearly wanting to wrap things up quickly. There were no fights over property or assets, no bitter negotiations. David kept his car and his retirement account. I kept the house and everything in it. We split our shared savings down the middle and went our separate ways. 3 weeks after the dinner party, I found myself sitting in my art room, the space my mother-in-law had wanted to convert into a nursery. I'd reclaimed it completely, setting up my easel by the window where the morning light was best. My fingers felt clumsy at first, rusty from months of neglect, but muscle memory kicked in as I mixed colors on my palette. I wasn't painting anything specific, just letting the brush move across the canvas in whatever direction felt right. Blue gave way to green, then to purple, then to yellow. Colors I hadn't allowed myself to use when everything in my life felt gray. That's when I started writing. Not because I had some grand plan or message to share, but because the thoughts in my head needed somewhere to go. I created an anonymous blog called Second Chances, and wrote about the small discoveries I was making each day. How it felt to cook dinner without worrying if someone else would like it. How it felt to watch whatever I wanted on television. How it felt to go to bed when I was tired instead of staying up waiting for someone who might not come home. The responses surprised me. Women from all over the country began commenting, sharing their own stories of betrayal and rebuilding. Some were going through divorces. Others had survived affairs. A few were dealing with family betrayals that made my situation look simple by comparison. "You're so brave," one woman wrote. "I wish I had your strength." But I didn't feel brave. I felt like I was stumbling through each day, figuring it out as I went along. Strength seemed too big a word for what I was doing. I was just refusing to give up. My father called on a Tuesday evening, something he'd never done before. David had always been the one to maintain contact with my family. "I owe you an apology," he said without preamble. "I should have seen what was happening. I should have protected you better. Dad, you couldn't have known. I could have asked more questions. I could have paid closer attention to how you looked during those family dinners. You were disappearing right in front of us, and we were all too focused on your sister's drama to notice." His honesty caught me off guard. We talked for an hour, really talked in a way we hadn't since I was a teenager. He told me about his own parents' troubled marriage, about lessons he'd learned too late to help his daughters navigate their relationships. My mother visited the following weekend, bringing homemade soup and staying to help me reorganize the guest room. As we folded linens together, she cried quietly. "I failed you," she said. "I was so worried about keeping the peace that I forgot to protect my own daughter." "You didn't fail me, Mom. You couldn't have prevented Jessica's choices. But I could have made different choices myself. I could have called you more. I could have insisted on spending time with you separately, not just at family gatherings where everyone was performing for each other." These conversations with my parents felt like finding pieces of myself I'd forgotten existed. The daughter who'd been confident and funny before she'd learned to shrink herself to fit into someone else's life. Jessica's baby was born in December, right on schedule. Aaron was there for the delivery, I heard through my mother, but he didn't stay. He'd moved back to Seattle permanently, establishing a custody arrangement that would allow him to be part of his daughter's life without having to rebuild a relationship with Jessica. My mother-in-law never called or visited. David's sister sent a brief text apologizing for her mother's behavior, but that was the extent of contact from that side of the family. Their absence felt like a gift rather than a loss. I realized how much energy I'd spent trying to earn approval from people who'd never really accepted me. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I found myself writing a letter I knew I'd never send. It started as therapy, a way to organize my thoughts about everything that had happened. But as I wrote, it became something else, a strange kind of gratitude letter. "Dear Jessica," it began, "you probably think I hate you. You probably think I'll spend the rest of my life bitter about what you did to my marriage. But here's what you don't understand, you didn't steal my life. You freed me from a life that was slowly suffocating me." I wrote about how my marriage had been failing long before she'd gotten involved. How David and I had been going through the motions for months, maybe longer. How I'd been so focused on being the perfect wife that I'd forgotten who I was underneath all that effort. You showed me what I was really worth to my husband, I continued. You showed me what I was worth to his family. You showed me that the life I was fighting so hard to preserve wasn't actually worth preserving. The letter filled 3 pages before I was finished. I folded it carefully and placed it in my desk drawer, underneath the DNA test results that had changed everything. Some truths were meant to be acknowledged privately, not shared. That evening, I made myself a cup of tea and sat in my favorite chair with a book I'd been wanting to read for months. Outside, snow was beginning to fall, covering my small garden in white. Inside, my house was warm and quiet and completely my own. For the first time since that devastating dinner party, I felt genuinely happy. Not the desperate, grasping happiness of someone trying to convince themselves everything was fine, but the deep, steady contentment of someone who'd learned the difference between being alone and being lonely. I had my truth. I had my freedom. I had my second chance. And that was more than enough to build a life on. If this story of hidden truth and quiet strength had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Sarah revealed the DNA results at that perfectly orchestrated dinner party, watching everyone's masks finally fall. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more empowering stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.
I'm Allison, 27, a graphic designer barely making rent in New York. Growing up, money was always a sore subject with my parents, Karen and James. When my beloved grandmother Evelyn passed away last month, they insisted there was nothing to inherit. Just another family disappointment, I thought. Then yesterday, her lawyer called about a $2 million trust in my name. My hands are still shaking. Before I continue my story, let me know where you're watching from the comments. If you've ever had family hide things from you, hit subscribe and join me on this wild journey. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Portland, where every house looked similar enough to blend together, but with just enough differences to maintain some individuality. Our house was always well-maintained on the outside, with my mom Karen obsessively tending to the garden when neighbors were outside. Dad's BMW was always parked in the driveway rather than the garage, a subtle flex that I didn't understand until much later. We have to maintain certain appearances, my mother would say, adjusting her pearl earrings before heading to another neighborhood function. It's about respect, Allison. Inside our home was a different story. The furniture was aging, the kitchen appliances outdated, and my bedroom was decorated with secondhand items. Whenever I asked for new clothes or school supplies, my parents would sigh dramatically about how money was tight. "You don't understand the value of $1. My dad James would lecture, while simultaneously bringing home a new golf club or designer watch. When you're older, you'll realize how hard it is to keep up with expenses. In sharp contrast to my parents' home was my grandmother Evelyn's modest one-story house just 20 minutes away. It wasn't impressive from the outside, with its simple white siding and small front porch, but inside it was the warmest place I knew. Every Saturday, without fail, my mother would drop me off at Grandma Evelyn's house on her way to her weekly salon appointment. Those Saturdays became my sanctuary. "There's my little artist." Grandma would greet me, her arms open wide for a hug that smelled like vanilla and cinnamon. Her silver hair was always pulled back in a neat bun, and her blue eyes twinkled when she smiled. Grandma's house was filled with books, handmade quilts, and an eclectic collection of art that she'd gathered over her lifetime. Unlike my parents' home, nothing matched perfectly, but everything felt right together. "Beauty isn't about perfection, Allie," she'd tell me while we baked cookies in her tiny kitchen. "It's about how something makes you feel when you look at it." While the cookies baked, we'd sit at her dining table covered in art supplies. Watercolors, colored pencils, charcoal, and sketchbooks were our tools for adventure. Grandma had been an art teacher before retirement, and she recognized my passion for drawing immediately. "You have a gift, sweetheart," she'd say, gently guiding my hand as I learned to shade. "Never let anyone tell you that creativity isn't valuable." Unfortunately, my parents were exactly those anyone she warned me about. "Art is a nice hobby, Allison, but it's not a career," my mother would say dismissively when she'd pick me up and see my latest creation. "Your father and I didn't work this hard for you to struggle your whole life." I'd watch Grandma's jaw tighten ever so slightly at these comments, but she never argued in front of me. Instead, she'd slip my artwork into a special portfolio she kept in her craft room. "One day, you'll have your own gallery showing," she'd whisper as we hugged goodbye. As I grew older, I began to notice tensions between my parents and grandmother that went beyond my art. During holiday gatherings, I'd catch snippets of heated discussions that would abruptly end when I entered the room. "The family money isn't just yours to decide how to use, Mom," I overheard my father saying one Thanksgiving when I was 12. "James, I've already explained my decisions. Family responsibility means more than just handing over checks," Grandma had replied firmly. After these exchanges, my parents would be cold toward Grandma, while she became even more protective of me. She started inviting me for overnight stays, teaching me more about art history and technique, and telling me stories about my grandfather, who had passed before I was born. "Your grandfather built something wonderful from nothing but hard work and integrity," she told me one night as she showed me old photographs. "He never forgot where he came from, even when success found him." I learned that my grandfather had owned a manufacturing business, but Grandma was vague about what happened to it after he died. Whenever I asked direct questions about family money, she would gently change the subject. "The most important inheritance is values, not valuables," she would say, tapping my heart. "Remember that, Allie." As I entered my teenage years, Grandma became my confidant. When my parents pressured me about my grades or appearance, she was my refuge. When they dismissed my dreams as childish, she nurtured them. And when they began pushing me toward business school as college approached, she was the only one who asked what I actually wanted. "Your life belongs to you, Allison," she said during one particularly difficult weekend after a massive fight with my parents about college applications. "Not to them, not to me, not to anyone else. Choose your path with your heart and your head together." That conversation changed everything for me. It gave me the courage to apply to art schools, even knowing my parents wouldn't approve. What I didn't know then was how this decision would expose the deep fractures in our family that had been hidden beneath the surface for decades. When my acceptance letter from the prestigious Parsons School of Design in New York arrived, I was ecstatic. My dream school had not only accepted me but had been impressed enough with my portfolio to offer a partial scholarship. I rushed to show my parents, hoping the scholarship might soften the blow of my choice. I found them in the living room, my father scrolling through his phone while my mother flipped through a magazine. I stood in the doorway, letter clutched to my chest, heart pounding. "I got in," I announced, my voice trembling with excitement. "Parsons accepted me, with a scholarship." My father didn't even look up. "Parsons? That art school you applied to against our advice?" "It's one of the best design schools in the country," I explained, stepping forward. "And they're offering me $15,000 in scholarship money." My mother set down her magazine. $15,000 doesn't even cover half the tuition, Allison. Do you have any idea how expensive New York is?" "I know it's expensive, but this is my dream. I thought maybe you could help with some of the tuition, and I could work part-time and take out loans for the rest." My father finally looked at me, his expression hard. "We've been very clear about this. We saved for you to attend state and get a business degree. Something practical that will lead to a real career. We're not funding an art degree, so you can end up waiting tables with a worthless diploma." I felt like I'd been slapped. "It's not worthless. People make good livings as designers." "Not enough people to justify the risk," my mother said. "If you insist on this path, you're on your own financially." That night, I cried myself to sleep. The next day, I called Grandma Evelyn and told her everything. "Come over for dinner," was all she said. When I arrived, she had made my favorite meal and set the table with her good china, something she only did for special occasions. "I'm so proud of you," she said, serving me a slice of pot roast. "Parsons is an incredible accomplishment." "It doesn't matter," I said, pushing food around my plate. "I can't afford it. Mom and Dad won't help unless I go to business school." Grandma was quiet for a moment, studying me with those perceptive blue eyes. "What if I told you I have a small savings that could help with your first year? Would you still want to go?" I nearly dropped my fork. You do that for me? But it's so much money. Education is the best investment I could make, she said firmly. And talent like yours shouldn't be wasted because of. She paused, something flashing across her face. Because of narrow thinking. With Grandma's help, I moved to New York that fall. My parents were cold when I left, making it clear they thought I was making a huge mistake. My father's parting words still sting when I think of them. When this fails, don't come running home expecting us to bail you out. New York was everything I dreamed of and harder than I'd imagined. The city's energy was intoxicating, but the cost of living was staggering. My tiny dorm room cost more than most people's entire apartments back home. Art supplies drained my budget faster than I'd anticipated. After paying for essentials, there was barely anything left. I found a barista job at a coffee shop near campus for mornings, worked in the school library afternoons between classes, and picked up weekend shifts at a restaurant. Even with 3 jobs, I was barely staying afloat. Most nights, I get back to my dorm after midnight and still have to complete design projects due the next day. Grandma called every Sunday without fail. She never asked about money, but always wanted to hear about my classes and see pictures of my projects. I kept my struggles to myself, not wanting her to worry. When she asked if I was eating enough, I'd lie and say yes, even as my jeans grew looser. You sound tired, Allie, she said during one call. Just busy with projects, I replied, stifling yawn. I'd been awake for nearly 40 hours finishing a major assignment. Are you taking care of yourself? Your health matters more than grades. Ai fine, grandma. Just the normal college experience. When I went home that first Christmas, my parents seemed almost disappointed that I was doing well. They asked leading questions about how I was handling expenses, clearly expecting me to admit defeat. How many student loans have you had to take out? My father asked over dinner. I'm managing, I said vaguely. Well, the offer of business school is still open, my mother added. You could transfer next semester, start fresh. I changed the subject, but later that night, I overheard them talking to Grandma in the kitchen. We know you gave her money, Mom, my father said accusingly. You're just enabling her poor choices. What I do with my money is my business, James, Grandma replied calmly. And supporting my granddaughter's education is hardly a poor choice. That money should be going toward your future care needs, my mother interjected, not being thrown away on art supplies. I slipped away before I could hear Grandma's response, but the next day, she took me out for lunch, just the 2 of us. Don't worry about what your parents think, she told me, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. Just focus on your education and your dreams. The rest will sort itself out. When I returned to New York for spring semester, disaster struck. The scholarship committee informed me that due to budget cuts, they couldn't renew the partial scholarship for my second year. I was devastated. Even working 3 jobs, I couldn't possibly make up the difference. I spent a week researching transfer options to cheaper schools, crying myself to sleep each night at the thought of leaving Parsons. I'd finally found where I belonged, where my art was valued and my skills were growing. The thought of giving it all up was unbearable. The day before the tuition deadline, I received an email from the financial aid office. An anonymous donor had established a special scholarship that would cover my remaining tuition for the year. When I called to ask for details, they could only tell me it was a private donor who specified the funds be used for a promising design student. I knew immediately it was Grandma, though she denied it when I called her in tears of gratitude. Sometimes the universe provides what we need most, was all she would say. Just promise me you'll work hard and make the most of this opportunity. My parents were suspicious when they heard about the mysterious scholarship. During my sophomore year Thanksgiving visit, they confronted Grandma directly. This is inappropriate, Mom, my father said. You can't keep undermining our parenting decisions. I don't know what you're talking about, Grandma replied innocently, winking at me when my parents weren't looking. The pattern continued throughout my college years. Whenever I hit a financial wall, an anonymous solution would appear. A surprise rebate on housing, an unexpected scholarship for design excellence, a random contest win that paid for a semester of books. Grandma never admitted to being behind any of it, but the timing was always too perfect to be coincidence. I graduated with honors, my portfolio earning praise from instructors and local design firms alike. My parents attended graduation but seemed more relieved than proud, as if they'd been waiting for me to fail and were now unsure how to react to my success. "Well, you finished," my father said awkwardly. "That's something." Grandma, however, beamed with pride as she hugged me tight. "I knew you could do it, Allie. This is just the beginning." Despite my degree and portfolio, breaking into the competitive New York design scene proved difficult. I moved into a tiny apartment with 3 roommates in Brooklyn, took on freelance design projects that paid barely enough to cover ramen noodles, and continued barista work to make rent. My parents' calls became less frequent, usually consisting of pointed questions about my income and subtle suggestions that I should come to my senses and get a real job in business. Each call left me feeling drained and doubtful. But Grandma never wavered in her support. Even as her health began to decline, she remained my cheerleader from afar. "Keep going," she'd tell me. "The beginning is always the hardest part." What I didn't know then was that she was fighting her own battles, keeping secrets that would soon change everything. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was working on a logo design for a picky client who had already rejected 3 versions. My mother's voice was uncharacteristically shaken. "Grandma Evelyn had a stroke. She's in the hospital." I booked the first flight I could afford back to Portland, maxing out my only credit card. When I arrived at the hospital, my parents were in the hallway outside Grandma's room, deep in conversation with the doctor. "The prognosis is uncertain," the doctor was saying. "She's stable but weak. She'll need significant care moving forward." As soon as the doctor left, my parents turned to practical matters with alarming speed. "We should start looking at nursing homes," my father said, already scrolling through options on his phone. "There's a decent one near us that takes Medicare." "What about her house?" my mother added. "We should list it soon to cover the care costs." I was shocked by their clinical approach. "Shouldn't we wait until she's conscious to make these decisions? Maybe she can recover at home with a nurse." My father looked at me like I was naive. "That kind of in-home care costs a fortune, Allison. The house needs to be sold regardless." "But she loves that house," I protested. "All her memories are there." "This isn't about sentimentality," my mother said sharply. "It's about practical realities." When I was finally allowed to see Grandma, I barely recognized her. Her face was partially drooping on one side, and she seemed smaller somehow in the hospital bed. But when she saw me, her good eye lit up, and she squeezed my hand with surprising strength. Over the next few days, Grandma improved enough to speak, though her words were slurred. When my parents brought up the nursing home, she became agitated. "No institution," she managed to say firmly. "Mom, be reasonable," my father argued. "You need professional care." I made a split-second decision that would change everything. "She can come stay with me. I'll take care of her." My parents looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "In your tiny apartment with roommates? Be serious, Allison." "I'll figure it out," I insisted, looking at Grandma for approval. She nodded slightly, a ghost of a smile on her face. Despite my parents' objections, I took an extended leave from my freelance work and moved Grandma into my small Brooklyn apartment. My roommates were understanding, helping me convert our shared living space to accommodate her needs. I slept on the couch, so she could have my room. Those months were difficult, but precious. Between helping Grandma with physical therapy exercises and basic needs, I continued to work on freelance projects late into the night to keep us afloat. My savings dwindled rapidly, but I couldn't bring myself to regret my decision. As Grandma slowly regained some strength, she began sharing stories I'd never heard before. Family history that filled in gaps I hadn't even realized existed. "Your grandfather wasn't just a small business owner," she told me one evening as I helped her with dinner. "Harrison built that manufacturing company from nothing into something worth millions." I nearly dropped the soup spoon.
Millions?
But I thought. Grandma sighed, her good hand trembling slightly.
There's so much you don't know, Allie.
"So much I should have told you sooner." Over the following weeks, she shared pieces of a puzzle I'd never seen clearly. How my grandfather had invented a specialized manufacturing process for automotive parts. How his small garage operation had grown into a factory employing over 200 people. How he'd eventually sold the company for a substantial sum shortly before his death. What happened to all that money? I asked, confused by the disconnect between these stories and my understanding of our family finances. Grandma would get a faraway look in her eyes. "It's time things were made right," she'd say cryptically. "I've made arrangements." I didn't press her when she became tired or changed the subject. But I noticed she began asking me to bring her specific items from her house when I visited Portland to check on things. Old photo albums. Specific books. A small wooden jewelry box. Most importantly, she asked for her journals. Bottom drawer of my desk, under the stationery. Bring all of them. When I returned with a stack of leather-bound journals dating back decades, she seemed relieved. "Good girl. Keep these safe." Her health took another turn in early spring. The doctors warned me that her heart was weakening. One night, as I sat beside her bed reading aloud from her favorite poetry book, she suddenly gripped my hand. "The blue box," she whispered urgently. "In my sewing table. Secret compartment. Remember." Before I could ask what she meant, she drifted to sleep. 3 days later, she slipped away peacefully while I held her hand. The grief was overwhelming, like losing the only person who had ever truly seen me. The funeral was a tense affair. My parents took control of all arrangements, ignoring most of Grandma's previously stated wishes for a simple, intimate service. Instead, they invited business associates and neighborhood acquaintances, creating the kind of social event Grandma would have hated. "We need to start clearing out the house this weekend," my mother informed me after the service. "The real estate agent wants to list it by next month." "Can't we take some time first?" I asked, still raw with grief. "It's only been 3 days." "Time doesn't pay the bills that have piled up from her care," my father said dismissively. "Besides, there's nothing of real value there anyway." "I'd like to keep some of her things," I said. "Her art books, some of her paintings." My parents exchanged a look I couldn't interpret. "We'll need to sell anything worth selling to cover outstanding medical bills," my mother said. "You can have whatever's left." When we went to the house that weekend, I found my parents had already boxed up most of Grandma's belongings. Many items I'd hoped to keep as mementos were already labeled for estate sale or a donation. "What about her art supplies?" I asked, noticing the emptied craft room. "Already donated to the community center," my father replied without looking up from the cabinet he was emptying. "They were just gathering dust anyway." I felt a surge of anger. "You had no right to do that without asking me." "We're her children, Allison," my mother said coldly. "You're just her granddaughter. Legally, everything here belongs to us now." "Is there even a will?" I asked. My father shrugged. "Nothing formal. And there's nothing to inherit anyway." Whatever small savings she had went to her medical care. I didn't believe them, not after the stories Grandma had shared in her final months. But arguing seemed pointless. Instead, I quietly collected the few personal items they'd overlooked or deemed worthless. Photographs, her recipe box, a crocheted blanket she'd made. As I was gathering these treasures, I remembered her final whispered words. The blue box. Secret compartment. I made my way to her sewing room, which my parents had barely touched, probably seeing nothing of value in her crafting supplies. The old Singer sewing table stood in the corner, its wooden surface worn smooth from decades of use. I ran my hands along the edges, looking for anything unusual. On the right side, I felt a slight indentation. When I pressed it, a small drawer popped out from what had appeared to be a solid panel. Inside was a blue metal box, the kind used for storing cash at home. My heart racing, I slipped it into my bag just as I heard my mother's footsteps approaching. "Found anything worth keeping?" she asked from the doorway. "Just some patterns and thread," I lied, gesturing to the items I'd piled on top of the table as decoys. She nodded dismissively. "We'll donate those too. Be ready to leave in an hour." Back in New York, alone in my apartment that now felt emptier than ever without Grandma, I finally opened the blue box. Inside wasn't money or jewelry as I'd half expected, but old photographs and documents I didn't immediately understand. Most surprising was a business card paper-clipped to a sealed envelope with my name written in Grandma's handwriting. The card belonged to Harold Wilson, attorney at law, with a Manhattan address. I turned the envelope over in my hands, wondering what secrets it might contain. But before I could open it, my phone rang with a client emergency that required immediate attention. I tucked the envelope and card into my desk drawer, intending to return to them soon. I had no idea that this small blue box would completely upend everything I thought I knew about my family and my future. The weeks following Grandma's funeral passed in a blur of grief and work. I threw myself into freelance projects, partly to make up for the income lost during my time caring for her, and partly to avoid the emptiness that overwhelmed me when I stopped moving. My tiny apartment felt cavernous, without her presence. I'd gotten used to our routine, morning exercises, preparing her meals, reading together in the evenings. Now there was just silence and the constant pressure of mounting bills. The financial situation became dire when my largest client, a boutique clothing brand I'd been designing for, suddenly went bankrupt. The final payment they owed me, which I'd been counting on for rent, disappeared. My landlord's patience was wearing thin. "I need the rent by Friday, Allison," he said during his third call that week. "I've been understanding because of your grandmother, but business is business." I was contemplating selling my laptop and graphic tablet when my phone rang with an unknown Manhattan number. Assuming it was another client, I answered with my professional voice. "Allison speaking. How can I help you?" "Ms. Allison Taylor?" a deep male voice asked. "This is Harold Wilson from Wilson and Associates law firm. I'm calling regarding the estate of Evelyn Taylor." My heart skipped. The business card from the blue box. "Yes, that's my grandmother. She passed away last month." "I'm aware of her passing. Please accept my condolences. I served as your grandmother's attorney for over 30 years. I've been trying to reach you. Would you be available to meet at my office tomorrow?" I was instantly suspicious. After years of financial struggles, unexpected calls about money matters usually meant trouble, not opportunity. "Is this about outstanding medical bills?" I asked cautiously. "Because my parents are handling that." There was a pause. "No, Miss Taylor. This is regarding your inheritance. Your grandmother left explicit instructions that I contact you directly after her passing." "Inheritance," I echoed, thinking of my father's words. "There's nothing to inherit anyway." "I'd prefer not to discuss the details over the phone. Can you come to my office tomorrow at 2 p.m.? Still suspicious this might be some elaborate scam, I agreed but decided to do some research first. A quick internet search confirmed that Wilson and Associates was indeed a reputable law firm specializing in estate planning and trusts, with an office in the address listed on the business card. The next day, I put on my only professional outfit, a navy blazer over a simple dress, and made my way to a gleaming midtown office building. The law firm occupied the entire 15th floor, its reception area furnished with leather chairs and original artwork that made my designers I appreciate the understated elegance. A silver-haired man in an impeccable suit greeted me warmly. "Miss Taylor, thank you for coming. I'm Harold Wilson." He led me to a conference room with views of the city's skyline and offered me coffee before taking a seat across from me. "I've been your grandmother's attorney since before you were born," he began, opening a thick folder. "She was an extraordinary woman who cared deeply about you." "My parents said there was nothing left," I said bluntly. "They said her savings went to medical expenses." Mr. Wilson's expression tightened slightly. "I'm afraid your parents weren't entirely forthcoming. Your grandmother established a trust 20 years ago, with specific instructions for its management and distribution." He slid a document across the table. I stared at the figure on the bottom line, sure I was misreading it. $2 million? I whispered, looking up in disbelief. "Plus the house, which is held separately in the trust and not subject to sale by your parents." My mind reeled. I don't understand. My grandfather's company, my parents said. Your grandfather sold his manufacturing business for approximately $12 million in 1988, Mr. Wilson explained. The proceeds were divided into 3 trusts, one for your father, one for your grandmother's living expenses, and one for you. My father already received his inheritance?
Yes.
Your father received his $4 million share when he turned 30, about 20 years ago. Your grandmother received hers as income, and the final third was set aside for you, with specific conditions for its distribution. I sat back, struggling to process this information. My parents have had millions of dollars all this time, while telling me we couldn't afford college tuition? I can't speak to your parents' financial decisions, Mr. Wilson said diplomatically. But yes, they received a substantial inheritance. He handed me a sealed envelope, identical to the one in the blue box I hadn't yet opened. Your grandmother left this for you. She asked that I give it to you personally during this meeting. With trembling hands, I broke the seal and unfolded several pages covered in Grandma's familiar handwriting. My dearest Allison, asterisk if you're reading this, I've passed on, and Mr. Wilson has fulfilled his promise to contact you directly. There are truths you need to know that I couldn't share while I was alive without causing irreparable damage to our family. Asterisk when your grandfather died, he left his fortune to be divided equally among your father, myself, and a trust for his future grandchildren. Your father and mother received their portion when he turned 30. Within 5 years, they had spent almost all of it on appearances, luxury cars, country club memberships, expensive vacations, and status symbols, while continuing to complain about financial hardship. Asterisk I watched with growing concern as they developed patterns of financial irresponsibility, borrowing against their home and accumulating debt to maintain appearances. When you were born, I became determined to protect your future from their mismanagement. Asterisk the trust for you remained under my control until my death. Your parents have repeatedly attempted to access these funds, claiming they needed them for your upbringing and education. Had I allowed this, I fear nothing would remain for you now. Asterisk the $2 million in your trust comes with conditions I hope you'll understand. Half must be invested for at least 5 years before you can access the principal. The other half is available to you now, but with specific allocations. Funds for education, yours or future children's, establishing a home, healthcare needs, and creating a charitable foundation in the arts. Asterisk the house is also yours, to keep or sell as you choose. Your parents have no legal claim to it, despite what they may have told you. Asterisk I know this revelation will cause pain and conflict. Your parents will likely be angry when they discover I've left everything to you. They may attempt to contest the will or pressure you to share the inheritance. The trust is legally ironclad, but emotional manipulation is harder to defend against. Asterisk remember that you owe them nothing. The choices I've made were based on decades of watching their behavior and your character develop. You have shown responsibility, compassion, and integrity that gives me confidence in your stewardship of this legacy. Asterisk I love you, my darling girl. Use this gift to build the life you deserve, free from financial anxiety and full of the creative expression that makes your spirit soar. Asterisk all my love. Asterisk Grandma Evelyn. Asterisk I looked up at Mr. Wilson through tears. They lied to me my entire life. Your grandmother protected your inheritance because she believed in you, he said gently. She watched your parents squander their portion and was determined not to let the same happen to yours. Does my father know about this? Not yet. As per your grandmother's instructions, you are to be informed first. I'll be contacting your parents tomorrow to inform them of the will's provisions. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. The house sale falls through. Buyer backed out last minute. Call us. I looked at Mr. Wilson. They're going to be furious. The trust is solid, he assured me. They have no legal grounds to contest it. Your grandmother made certain of that. As I left the law office, clutching a folder of documents that represented financial security I'd never known, my phone rang again. This time, I let it go to voicemail. I needed time to process everything before facing my parents' inevitable rage. Back in my apartment, I finally opened the envelope from the blue box. It contained another letter from Grandma, nearly identical to the one Mr. Wilson had given me, but with an additional paragraph. The blue box contains copies of all important documents and my personal journals detailing your parents' financial history. Keep these safe. If they contest the will, these records will be crucial evidence of why I structured the trust as I did. Asterisk, sure enough, beneath the photographs in the box were financial statements, letters, and small leather-bound journals dating back decades. I began reading through them, uncovering the true history of my family's finances and my parents' deception. The next morning, my phone exploded with notifications. 8 missed calls from my parents, a dozen increasingly angry text messages, and finally, a voicemail that made my blood run cold. Allison, this is your father. We just got off the phone with Harold Wilson. We're coming to New York tomorrow. Don't you dare speak to that lawyer again before we talk. This is a family matter that needs to be resolved privately. The battle lines were drawn. I knew the confrontation would be ugly, but for the first time in my life, I had the resources to stand my ground. The knock on my apartment door came at exactly noon the next day. I'd been awake most of the night, reading through Grandma's journals and preparing myself emotionally for the confrontation. Still, my hand trembled as I turned the doorknob. My parents stood in the hallway, both looking like they'd barely slept. My mother was impeccably dressed as always, not a hair out of place despite the early flight. My father's jaw was set in the rigid way I recognized from childhood arguments. "Can we come in?" my mother asked stiffly. I stepped aside. They entered my small apartment, eyes darting around judgmentally at the mismatched furniture and art supplies scattered across my work table. "Would you like some coffee?" I offered, trying to maintain composure. "We didn't fly across the country for coffee, Allison," my father snapped. "We need to discuss this ridiculous situation with your grandmother's will." I took a deep breath. "What exactly do you find ridiculous about it?" "Don't play innocent," my mother said, setting her designer handbag on my second-hand coffee table. "You know exactly what we're talking about. $2 million? The house? All going to you while we get nothing?" "Mr. Wilson explained that you received your inheritance 20 years ago," I said quietly. $4 million. My father's face flushed. "That money was meant for the entire family. Your mother and I worked hard to provide you with a stable upbringing." While telling me we couldn't afford my college tuition, I countered, feeling a surge of long-suppressed anger. "While making me work 3 jobs and take out student loans. We were teaching you responsibility," my mother insisted. "Something your grandmother clearly undermined at every turn. Is that why you told me there was nothing to inherit? That all her money went to medical bills? That was a lie." My father paced the small living room. "We were protecting you from expectations." "Money changes people, Allison." "Clearly," I said pointedly. "Your grandmother was manipulated by you," my mother accused suddenly. "All those weekends with her, all the time you spent caring for her at the end. You were positioning yourself to inherit everything." The accusation stung so deeply, I nearly gasped. "I loved her, which is more than I can say for how you treated her." "We are your parents," my father thundered. "We raised you, fed you, clothed you. And now you think you can take what rightfully belongs to our family?" "Grandma's letter explained everything," I said, moving to my desk to retrieve the envelope. "She watched you spend your inheritance in 5 years. She was protecting my future." "Let me see that," my mother demanded, snatching the letter from my hands. Her eyes narrowed as she scanned the contents, then passed it to my father, whose face grew increasingly red. "This is slander," he sputtered. "Your grandmother was confused in her old age. Was she confused when you received $4 million at 30? I asked. Or when you spent it all on luxury cars and country club memberships while telling me we couldn't afford new school clothes?" My parents exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret. "We had investments that didn't pan out," my father said defensively. "The market crashed. There were circumstances beyond our control." "The journals in the blue box detail exactly where the money went," I said. "Every withdrawal, every purchase, every lie you told about our finances." My mother's perfectly composed facade cracked slightly. What blue box? The one Grandma left for me. The one with 30 years of financial records and personal journals documenting everything. The color drained from my father's face. Your grandmother had no right to air family business like that. She had every right to explain why she structured her will the way she did, I countered. Why she felt she needed to protect my inheritance from you. My mother's approach suddenly shifted. Her eyes welled with tears, and she reached for my hand. Sweetheart, we're family. We've always wanted what's best for you. This money could help all of us. Your father and I are approaching retirement age with very little savings. Because you spent $4 million, I said, gently pulling my hand away, while I worked myself to exhaustion trying to pay for school. We made mistakes, my father admitted, his tone softening to match my mother's new strategy. But we're still your parents. Family helps family. What about when I needed help? I asked. When I called home from college crying because I couldn't afford both rent and food that month. You told me to figure it out and learn to budget better. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. We were trying to teach you independence. No, you were hoarding wealth while pretending to be middle class. You were lying to me my entire life. My father's temporary softness vanished. So this is it? You're going to keep everything for yourself out of spite. I'm going to honor Grandma's wishes, I said firmly. The trust has conditions for how the money can be used. I intend to respect those conditions. We'll contest the will, my father threatened. Your grandmother wasn't of sound mind when she made these arrangements. The trust was established 20 years ago, I reminded him. And Mr. Wilson has confirmed it's legally ironclad. There are always ways around legal documents, my mother said coldly. And think about what this will do to our family. Once we go public with this dispute, there's no going back. I took a deep breath, feeling strangely calm despite the threat. I think our family was broken long before this inheritance came to light. My father stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. You have a choice to make, Allison. Share this inheritance with your family, or lose us forever. No more holidays, no more birthdays, no more family. Is that what you want? The ultimatum hung in the air between us. 6 months ago, it might have worked. The thought of losing my family, dysfunctional as they were, would have terrified me into compliance. But something had shifted during those months, caring for Grandma. Her stories, her wisdom, her unconditional love had shown me what real family should be. I think, I said slowly, that family doesn't threaten to abandon you when you don't give them money. I think real family supports your dreams instead of dismissing them. I think real family tells the truth. My mother's face hardened. So that's your decision? It is. My father grabbed his coat. You'll regret this, Allison. When you've alienated your only family for money, you'll realize what a mistake you've made. This isn't about money, I said as they moved toward the door. It's about honesty. It's about respect. It's about the kind of person I want to be. And apparently that's a selfish person who turns her back on her parents, my mother said, her voice dripping with venom. As the door slammed behind them, I collapsed onto my couch, shaking with adrenaline and emotion. The confrontation had been every bit as painful as I'd anticipated, but also strangely liberating. For the first time, I'd stood my ground against their manipulation. For the first time, I'd named the lies that had shaped my childhood. For the first time, I felt like I was honoring not just Grandma's wishes, but my own integrity. The silence of my apartment was broken by my phone ringing. I expected to see my parents' number, perhaps calling with one final guilt trip. Instead, it was my friend Sophia. Hey, I just wanted to check in. Her warm voice came through the speaker. You mentioned your parents were visiting today. How did it go? The simple kindness in her tone broke the dam. I found myself sobbing as I recounted everything, the inheritance, the confrontation, the ultimatum. Oh, Allie, she said when I finally paused for breath. I'm coming over. This is not something you should be alone with. As I hung up, I looked around my small apartment that had felt so empty after Grandma's death. Now it felt like a space being cleared for something new, something honest, something mine. The journey ahead would be difficult, I knew. My parents wouldn't give up easily. But for the first time in my life, I had both the resources and the clarity to stand firm in my truth. The formal notice arrived exactly 14 days after my parents stormed out of my apartment. The thick envelope contained legal documents informing me that James and Karen Taylor were contesting Evelyn Taylor's will on grounds of undue influence and diminished capacity. I immediately called Harold Wilson, who wasn't surprised by the development. "Your grandmother anticipated this," he said calmly. She left extensive documentation of her mental clarity and the reasoning behind her decisions. "This is unfortunate, but manageable." We arranged to meet the following day to prepare our response. As I entered his office, he had already assembled a team including a younger associate attorney named Julia and a paralegal who was organizing stacks of documents. "The good news," Harold explained, "is that your grandmother was extraordinarily thorough. She had regular cognitive assessments done by independent physicians for the past 15 years, specifically to prevent this type of challenge. She knew they would do this. She hoped they wouldn't, but she prepared as though they would." He gestured to the files. "These are her journals, financial records, correspondence with your parents, and medical evaluations. Our job now is to organize them into a compelling narrative for the court." Over the next few weeks, I split my time between freelance work and preparing for the legal battle. I'd moved into Grandma's house, which felt right somehow. Being surrounded by her things gave me strength during the difficult process of having her private thoughts and family conflicts prepared for public scrutiny. As I helped catalog the evidence, painful patterns emerged. Journal entries detailed my parents' repeated attempts to access my trust fund over the years. Letters documented their extravagant spending contrasted with their refusals to help with my education. Medical reports confirmed Grandma's sharp mental acuity even after her stroke. "Your grandmother built an airtight case," Julia assured me one afternoon as we reviewed documents. "But be prepared. Cases like this get personal and ugly." She was right. My parents' legal team began a whisper campaign among extended family, painting me as a manipulative granddaughter who had isolated an elderly woman to secure her fortune. Cousins I rarely spoke to sent accusatory messages. My Aunt Barbara, my father's sister, called to tell me how disappointed she was in my greed. "Do you even know the whole story?" I asked her. "I know enough," she replied. "Your parents worked hard their whole lives, and now you're trying to steal their inheritance." "They received their inheritance 20 years ago," I explained. "$4 million. There was a pause. "That's not what James told me." The conversation ended with her promising to get to the bottom of this, but the damage to my reputation was spreading. I felt increasingly isolated as family members chose sides based on partial information. The stress began manifesting physically. I developed insomnia, losing sleep over replaying confrontations and anticipating court appearances. Anxiety attacks would hit without warning, leaving me breathless and dizzy. My design work suffered as I struggled to focus on creative projects. During one particularly bad night, unable to sleep and overwhelmed by the conflict, I pulled out my sketchbook and began drawing without any particular plan. Hours passed as I lost myself in the process, creating abstract images that somehow captured the turmoil I was feeling. By morning, I had filled 20 pages with raw, emotional artwork unlike anything I'd created before. Looking at the pages spread across my floor, I felt a sense of release. The legal battle was draining me, but perhaps I could channel that pain into something meaningful. I began a deliberate practice of art therapy, setting aside time each day to express my emotions through visual media. These pieces weren't for clients or portfolios. They were for me, a way to process the complex grief and anger I was experiencing. One rainy afternoon, while working on a particularly intense mixed media piece, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find an elegant woman in her 60s standing on the porch. "You don't know me," she said.
"I'm Mildred Johnson."
"I was your grandmother's closest friend for over 40 years. I invited her in, and over tea, she shared stories about Grandma I'd never heard. Their adventures traveling through Europe in their 50s, their book club that had met monthly for decades, the community art programs they'd established together. "Evelyn talked about you constantly," Mildred said, smiling at a photograph of Grandma and me that sat on the mantel. "She was so proud of your talent and your kindness." "My parents say I manipulated her." I admit it, the words painful to speak aloud. Mildred's expression hardened. "That's rich, coming from them." "I watched your father and mother pressure Evelyn for money for decades. Your grandmother was nobody's fool, Allison. She knew exactly what she was doing with her will. Would you be willing to say that in court?" I asked hesitantly. "Darling, I've been hoping you'd ask. I have 40 years of witnessed behavior I'd be delighted to share with a judge." Mildred became not just a potential witness, but a source of emotional support as the court date approached. She introduced me to friends from Grandma's circle who shared similar stories of my parents' financial requests and manipulations over the years. Meanwhile, my artwork continued to evolve. The emotional pieces I'd been creating as therapy began to form a cohesive collection that told the story of family, betrayal, grief, and recovery. On a whim, I photographed several pieces and emailed them to a small gallery in Brooklyn that showcased emerging artists. To my surprise, the gallery owner, Diana Cruz, called me the next day. "These pieces are extraordinary," she said. "The emotional depth combined with your technical skill. I'd like to discuss featuring your work." When I visited her gallery, Diana proposed a show focused on my recent collection, which she described as a powerful exploration of family mythology and disillusionment. We scheduled the opening for the following month, which I suddenly realized would coincide with the final court date. "I can reschedule," I said, explaining the conflict. Diana shook her head. "Don't. Art is how we reclaim our narratives. Whatever happens in court that day, ending it with your public artistic statement seems perfectly appropriate." As the legal proceedings intensified, more troubling information about my parents emerged. Financial investigations revealed gambling debts my father had hidden for years. Mortgage documents showed their house had been refinanced multiple times to cover undisclosed expenses. Credit reports indicated they were significantly overextended despite their appearance of financial stability. During discovery, my mother was forced to admit they had indeed received the full inheritance 20 years earlier, but had invested unwisely. My father reluctantly acknowledged that they had asked Grandma for additional funds numerous times over the years, including attempts to access my trust. The night before the final court date, Harold called with unexpected news. "Your parents have approached us with a settlement offer," he said. "They're willing to drop the case if you agree to give them 25% of the inheritance." I considered the offer. The legal fees were mounting, and the emotional toll was exhausting. A quarter of the inheritance was still a substantial sum. "What would Grandma want me to do?" I asked. "She anticipated this too," Harold replied. "In her instructions to me, she wrote that she expected a settlement offer at some point and left the decision entirely to you. She said, and I quote, 'Allison will know the right path when the time comes.'" After a sleepless night weighing the options, I arrived at the courthouse with my decision. The settlement would end the painful public battle, but it would also reward my parents' manipulation and dishonesty. More importantly, it would betray Grandma's carefully considered wishes. "No settlement," I told Harold firmly. "We proceed as planned." The final hearing was surprisingly anticlimactic. After reviewing the extensive documentation and hearing testimony from Mildred and other witnesses, the judge ruled completely in my favor, dismissing the challenge to the will with a pointed comment about frivolous claims wasting the court's time. My parents left without speaking to me, their attorney trailing behind with promises to appeal that everyone knew were empty. I stood in the courthouse hallway, expecting to feel triumphant or at least relieved. Instead, I felt strangely hollow. "What now?" I asked Harold as we gathered our documents. "Now you live your life," he said simply. "The way your grandmother hoped you would." I checked my watch. The gallery opening was in 3 hours. Diana had arranged for a car to take me directly from court, with a change of clothes waiting at the gallery. As I prepared to leave, my phone rang. It was my father. "We need to talk," he said, his voice subdued. "Your mother and I have been reflecting. Perhaps we were hasty in our approach." "What are you suggesting?" I asked cautiously. "Family reconciliation," he said. "We've lost enough already. Let's not lose each other too." For a moment, hope flickered in my chest. Then came the qualifier. Of course, we'd still appreciate some financial consideration. Nothing formal through the courts. Just family helping family. And there it was, the same manipulation, just in a gentler package. Nothing had changed. "I have an art opening tonight," I said. "I need to go." "Art opening? Is that more important than fixing your family?" "It's about building a new life," I replied. "One based on honesty and respect. You're welcome to be part of that life, but not on conditional terms." I ended the call and headed to the gallery, where my new journey was waiting to begin. The artwork that had begun as therapy was about to become my public statement. Not just about family trauma, but about healing and reclaiming my narrative. That evening, surrounded by strangers admiring my most vulnerable creative expressions, I felt a weight lifting. The legal battle was over. The truth had been acknowledged. And most importantly, I was finally free to build a life on my own terms, the greatest gift Grandma could have given me. 1 year later, I stood in the center of my second gallery showing, surrounded by a collection titled Inheritance. Unlike my first emotional exhibition created during the heat of the legal battle, this series represented a year of intentional healing and growth. "The evolution from your first show is remarkable," Diana said, gesturing toward a large mixed media piece that anchored the collection. "There's still raw emotion, but there's peace here too." The gallery was filled with art lovers, critics, and friends. My work had received unexpected attention after the first show, with several pieces being purchased by collectors and a profile in a respected art magazine. What had begun as therapy had evolved into a promising career path alongside my design work. My new apartment in a converted industrial building provided both living space and a studio with northern light that streamed through tall windows. The walls displayed a careful curation of Grandma's artwork mixed with my own, a visual conversation between our creative spirits. After the inheritance was settled, I'd followed Grandma's wishes meticulously. Most of the money remained invested, growing steadily under the guidance of a financial advisor Harold had recommended. I'd used a small portion to secure the apartment and studio space, investing in my creative future while maintaining financial security. I'd established limited contact with my parents on my terms, occasional emails and rare phone calls that remained civil but distant. They had finally stopped asking about money, though I suspected this was strategy rather than acceptance. Either way, the boundary had held. "Allison," a familiar voice called from across the gallery. Nathan waved, making his way through the crowd. We'd met 6 months earlier when I'd volunteered to teach art classes at the community center where he worked as an art therapist. What began as a professional respect for each other's approach to healing through creativity had gradually blossomed into something more personal. "The show looks amazing," he said, kissing my cheek. "How are you feeling about it?" "Grateful," I replied honestly. "A year ago, I couldn't have imagined being here." Nathan nodded, understanding the journey behind those simple words. He'd been there through panic attacks that still occasionally surfaced, through difficult therapy sessions unpacking decades of family dynamics, through the gradual process of rebuilding my sense of self outside the shadow of manipulation. After the gallery event, I took a bouquet of daisies, Grandma's favorite, to the small memorial garden I'd created in the community space behind my building. I'd scattered some of her ashes there, keeping a connection to her in my daily life. "I wish you could see this, Grandma," I said softly, arranging the flowers in the small stone vase. "I think you'd be proud." Back in my apartment, I opened the special box where I kept Grandma's most treasured letters. There was one final sealed envelope I'd never opened, marked for Allison. "Read when you're ready." For months, I hadn't been ready, afraid of reopening wounds that were just beginning to heal. Tonight felt different. Sitting by the window overlooking the city lights, I carefully broke the seal. My dearest Allison, asterisk if you're reading this, some time has passed since my departure, and you've faced the challenges I anticipated. Knowing you, you've faced them with courage and integrity. Asterisk, I want you to know that I foresaw the conflict my will would create. Your parents' patterns were established long ago, and I knew they would not easily accept my decisions. The painful truth is that money often reveals character rather than changing it. Asterisk, but this letter isn't about the past. It's about your future. By now, you've likely discovered that the true inheritance I wanted to leave you wasn't financial. Money is simply a tool, useful only in how it serves your values and purpose. Asterisk, the real legacy I hope to pass on is the understanding that family is not defined by blood or obligation, but by love, respect, and mutual support. Sometimes we must create our chosen family from the people who genuinely care for our well-being. Asterisk, I hope you've begun to build that chosen family around you. I hope you've continued creating art that speaks your truth. I hope you've learned to trust yourself and your instincts about who deserves a place in your life. Asterisk, most of all, I hope you've found moments of joy and peace amidst the difficulties. Remember what I always told you about finding beauty in unexpected places? That skill will serve you throughout your life. Asterisk, whatever path you've chosen, know that I am proud of you. Not for what you've achieved or acquired, but for who you are, a person of compassion, creativity, and courage. Asterisk, all my love. Always. Asterisk, Grandma Evelyn. Asterisk, tears streamed down my face, but they weren't the painful tears of grief or anger that had dominated the past year. These felt cleansing, affirming. Over the next few months, I channeled Grandma's wisdom into building the life she had envisioned for me. The charitable foundation I established, called Evelyn's Vision, provided art education scholarships for low-income students. I joined the board of a community arts organization, advocating for accessible creative programming in underserved neighborhoods. When my friend Sophia was diagnosed with a rare medical condition requiring expensive treatment not covered by insurance, I was able to help without hesitation. Watching her recover and return to her teaching career reinforced Grandma's belief that money's true purpose was enabling generosity and security, not status or power. Nathan and I grew closer, our relationship deepening through honest conversations about family patterns and how they shaped us. His own experience with a difficult father helped him understand my ongoing healing process without trying to rush or fix it. Healthy relationships aren't about erasing the past, he said one evening as we cooked dinner together in my kitchen. They're about creating a present where the past doesn't control you. 6 months after my second gallery show, I received a letter from Jasmine, the first recipient of the Evelyn's Vision Scholarship. She enclosed photographs of her artwork and a heartfelt thanks for the opportunity to pursue her creative education without financial strain. Your grandmother's legacy is changing lives, Nathan observed as we looked through Jasmine's portfolio. She always said that the most important inheritance was values, not valuables, I replied, remembering Grandma's words from childhood that now carried deeper meaning. On the anniversary of Grandma's passing, I established a new tradition, hosting a gathering of my chosen family, friends who had supported me through the darkest days and celebrated the brightest ones. We shared stories, created art together, and honored the connections that had formed from genuine care rather than obligation. Sophia brought her famous apple pie, made from Grandma Evelyn's recipe that I'd shared with her. Nathan arrived with armfuls of daisies for everyone to take home. Mildred, now a dear friend and mentor, brought vintage photographs of Grandma in her younger years that I'd never seen. As evening fell, we moved to the rooftop garden of my building, fairy lights twinkling above us as we raised glasses in a toast. To Evelyn, Mildred said, her eyes misting. Who knew that the truest wealth is in the hearts we touch? Later, alone in my studio, I added the finishing touches to a new painting, a symbolic representation of the journey from hurt to healing. At its center was a blue box, partially open, with light spilling out to illuminate the darkness surrounding it. The title came to me as I signed my name in the corner, The Real Inheritance. My phone chimed with a text from Nathan. Proud of you. Not just for your success, but for your growth. See you tomorrow. I smiled, thinking of how far I'd come from that devastated young woman who had opened the blue box a year ago. The inheritance had changed my life, but not in the way anyone might have expected. The money provided security, yes, but the true gift had been the freedom to discover my own strength, to define family on my own terms, and to break cycles of manipulation that had persisted for generations. Grandma Evelyn had known all along what I needed most wasn't in a bank account. It was the wisdom to recognize authentic love, the courage to establish healthy boundaries, and the confidence to create a life aligned with my values. That was the real inheritance worth $2 million and infinitely more. If my story resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever discovered family secrets that changed your understanding of your past? How did you handle it? Remember to subscribe for more stories of healing and transformation, and hit that like button if you found value in today's journey. Thank you for joining me in this vulnerable sharing. May you find the strength to create your own chosen family filled with authentic love and support.